Hi folks, I'm going to give you this angle on the avocado tree only because, well, you're still dealing with dappled sunlight. There's very little I can do about it. And I kind of just want to go with, you know what, if we're going to do this, let's just do this. Let's just enjoy the avocado tree, okay? So I wondered, yesterday when I talked about the videos that I was going to do to the follow-up video I did 2 days ago, which was a summary of all the eclipse energy and the energy that is going to be with us from the middle of May to the middle of July, yesterday's video started to look at the transits in Gemini, and I thought I would tackle those first. In other words, I thought I would tackle the relevant transits that will impact the June the 5th eclipse in Sagittarius first, because there are a number of transits and things to cover. The number of planets are going retrograde, Mars is entering Pisces, there's a lot to consider. And by all means, I'll place links to both my last two videos and the Venus in Gemini video. I'll place a link to all of those once I'm done processing this video at the end of this video, so you can go back and watch those if you need to or want to. But I'm starting with the transits that have a direct impact on the June the 5th eclipse, and then I'll move on to the June 20th and July 4th eclipses. That's how I'm gonna categorize this, because a lot of the transits are directly correlated to these eclipses. And yesterday's was about Mercury being in Gemini for about a 3-week period. And I've already done a Venus in Gemini video, and I've already talked so much about Venus in Gemini, and especially about Venus going in retrograde, that I thought, do I really want to spend more time talking about Venus in retrograde? And the answer that came out to me is yes, and there was some more information that came out on it. And I want to share that with you. Part of the reason why I want to do this is because after today's video in Gemini, there is going to be so much going on in that sign, so it's always going to be helpful to you to know where Gemini sits in your chart. I will try and give a more general a view of things in this video, because it is a general reading, and then if you know what house Gemini occupies and what that house stands for, you will already have a sense of where the Venus retrograde is starting to brew. Indeed, Venus goes retrograde in a few hours time later today. Today's May the 13th, but I can tell when I talk to my clients, and even for myself, the Venus retrograde energy has been felt for about a week and has been building. And it's when a planet goes retrograde, it's been going direct for a while, and then to us it looks like it stops or slows down, and then to us it appears like it's moving backwards. And it's those dates when it slows down and is stationary, and the day when it's going to go direct on June the 25th, that it can definitely be argued that those are the days when you feel the retrograde energy the most strongly, or the stopping of that retrograde energy most strongly. As a quick reminder, why do the Gemini transits affect the lunar eclipse in Sagittarius? They do so because the eclipse is caused by the sun being in Gemini, which is going to be starting May the 20th, and the moon being in Sagittarius. A lunar eclipse is a full moon that is aligned with the Earth in such a way that it creates an eclipse. I'm going to leave it at that for now. I'm not going to go into an eclipse. I'm not going to go into an astronomy lesson. But the sun and the moon and the Earth are aligned. It's a full moon, and because the sun is in Gemini, the planets in Gemini are definitely in conversation with this eclipse. And at the time of the June 5th eclipse, the Venus retrograde and the sun will be in Gemini. Mercury will have moved on into Cancer, but in the build-up to it, Mercury is there, and yesterday's video will talk about Mercury's impact on Gemini and this Venus retrograde period, and the communication and the processing element being really strong. And by communication, I mean both speaking and writing and typing and social media and technology and emails and contracts being really strong for the next 3 weeks. And then after that, some of that kind of dies out. So that's why the Gemini transits are relevant to the June 5th lunar eclipse. Venus as a planet is given a lot of importance in what I will call commercial astrology, and by that I mean the astrology you read in magazines and newspapers, as a planet of relationships, but more from an eye towards romance and sexuality. That's not surprising, because a lot of commercial astrology feeds to or talks to our desire to be in love and be in relationship and be dating and all that kind of stuff. I don't really think that that's entirely accurate insofar as Venus on her own you can't just look at Venus without looking at Mars. It's Venus and Mars together that really manage that area of our lives. Among other things, everything kind of, but it's a Venus-Mars thing. It's not just a Venus thing. So sometimes when you're looking at Venus retrograde and what it may mean, there can be a lot of emphasis on exes coming back, a lot of emphasis on our dating life, our romantic life, our sexual life. And it's only partly true. Venus to me stands for the word I would use for Venus. The word that is normally used for Venus by, I would say, astrologers that I trust is going to be the same word that I would use, which is value and worth. So money certainly becomes Venus's domain. For people who follow other kind of astrologies or in the Hindu, money, knowledge, the arts, the more benign, the more loving, the softer aspects of the mother goddess. So Lakshmi, money, Saraswati, the arts, I'm thinking more about the Hindu iconography, and Venusian, again, this is more sort of the patriarchal projection onto Venus. Beauty. An astrologer that I actually really liked would say love, beauty, and art. I would say money, creative endeavors, relationships, and a sense of harmony, balance, peace, beauty, luxury, finery, flow, abundance. And when it comes to value and worth, an emphasis also on self-worth, because it is that our sense of self-worth in our lives very much drives what we experience with regard to abundance. What do we feel we deserve? What do we feel we are worth? How much do we think we're worth? How much do we charge? How much do we ask for? How much do we believe we deserve for the kind of work that we do? Do we think that if we were doing a certain kind of work, we would deserve a certain life, but if we do something that we love a lot more, we actually deserve less somehow? All of that is where I find Venus truly active and truly humming along. When I've talked about Venus retrograde so far, I have asked the following questions. What do you value? And how do you right-size your life, especially financially, in terms of aligning it to what you value? And I've also asked the question, what do you own and what owns you? I've also stated that a Venus retrograde period from May the 13th to June the 25th is going to be a time to re-evaluate what do you value, your finances and your relationships above all. I've also mentioned that it is very likely and very possible that prior relationships, exes, people that are important to you, depending on where Venus is retrograde in your chart. If Venus is retrograde in the house of friendship, it could be old friends that somehow return for some sort of re-examination. If Venus is retrograde in the more romantic part of the chart, then absolutely exes could show up. If Venus is retrograde in the shared resources part of the chart, then it could be that it's something related to taxes or inheritance or your partner or spouse's income or money that is shared together somehow is up for reevaluation with regard to where you all want to go as a family or as a couple. So it really depends on where this is playing out to some extent. But thematically, this idea of what do I value? Why am I doing what I am doing? Why am I in it? And how am I using my resources well and effectively? Or is there waste? The word that I would use for Venus is flow. I find that Venus is the mother goddess energy that keeps everything going in its most natural and harmonious state. There's a maturity, a wisdom, a higher intelligence to Venus, and I think of Venus and a lot of contemporary astrologers who are giving Earth her place in the chart could argue and say, well, they're attributing it to Gaia, which is what we're calling Earth. It's still a very new thing, the adding of Gaia to a chart and what it stands for and what it means. I'm not knocking it. It's interesting. But there is a sense, even if you take, by flow I mean that intelligence and that flow that makes the grass grow and makes a kitten grow bigger and makes I'm looking at some fruit on trees, makes the fruit grow on trees. There's a greater allows our bodies to heal. There's a greater intelligence at work, a greater sense of flow, a natural harmony that is at work. That really does seem to come from a more feminine principle in place and has a sense of rightness. And that is where the idea of balance and harmony and flow and peace and resolution, as opposed to retribution, the restoring of a natural order, the restoring of the natural order that exists, a sense of abundance. We're already living on an abundant planet. Now, it's interesting, Venus going retrograde at this time. Is there something in terms of what we value? It was a very timely time, in a sense, for Venus retrograde, for us to contemplate and think about what do we value as far as the planet is concerned. But this theme of flow, when Venus goes through a certain part of the chart, I often find that opportunities come through, and they come through from the outside. Things start to flow, and there's a natural flow and rightness, and they're lucky breaks. They may not be as enormous or huge as when Jupiter comes through, but I find Jupiter kind of operates in a counterintuitive way. Jupiter's way of giving you luck can often mean that you get laid off so that you can go pursue what you want to pursue. Or it can mean that something burns down, or something has to end, or a couch has to go before. People often say with Jupiter you get millions of dollars and you get that big promotion and stuff like that. And I think you can if you're on the right path or the right track. You can. But with Jupiter, I find that the luck comes in different ways. And I'm saying this only because Venus and Jupiter are considered the two lucky planets. With Venus, that luck is experienced in maybe a more mundane way, but there are opportunities in flow and opportunities for money and opportunities for relationships that naturally flow out of a Venus transit. And when Venus goes retrograde, I find that it often feels like God has turned off the tap of abundance. Turned off the tap. There is no flow of a certain kind. Now, please don't freak out, everybody, with regard to this idea of no flow. Oh my God, is this going to happen? Is that going to happen? I'm going to get this. Everything is happening in some sort of divine order. And be careful with anxiety, because often anxiety and worry should be honored as things that propel us to take care of certain things. But sometimes anxiety can be a sign of self-importance. Why isn't this happening the way it should be happening? And why am I not going to get what I want? Come on. Cool it. Sometimes anxiety is a sign of a loss of control and not getting the outcome you want in the way that you want it. That kind of anxiety, when God turns the tap off, and the anxiety at watching this video and going, oh my God, the tap is turning off, all this stuff is not good, just give it a rest. I'm telling you, if it's anxiety that's actually scaring you and creating fear of a kind that is legitimate and you're at risk or it's some sort of danger, by all means use that fear and anxiety to make yourself safe. But if it's anxiety around, oh my God, the flow is going to stop and this is not going to happen and that's not going to... I think then we need to think about, do we really think that we're always going to get what we want the way we want it? The purpose of God turning off the flow, I find, is for us to reprioritize. Now, I have already expressed, and I will express my sadness if for people for whom the financial flow has been stopped, deal with during this Venus retrograde grave decision making. And I am sorry, and I can only hope that you have the time to go and look at various resources that do seem to be offered. I'm not saying that it's smooth, to help you through decision making if the flow has stopped in ways that are enormously stressful. It can happen during a Venus retrograde period. The larger purpose, if you are in the space to entertain that purpose, is to really ask the question, what do you value? So if you're holding out for something, if there's something that's really important to you, then how do you realign everything? Where you're living, what you're eating, what you're spending your money on, what is important to you, what are your resources serving? Why are you in the game? And what game do you want to be in? Or is it time to change the game and pursue something else or look at something else? Whether it is a geography, it is a location, it's a place, it's a career. In a certain sense, what is that reprioritization? It can sometimes, the stop of flow can be God checking and saying, are we still in this? If so, we need to right size. I do give this example. Sometimes when we live our life and the flow and the tap is on and the abundance is experienced, if we think of ourselves as snails, the shell on our back gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And during Venus retrograde for the 6-week period, when the flow is stopped and God turns off the tap, it's as if to say, right size your life. That shell too big for where you're going. In fact, you can't go. You can't move. If you've invested in a mansion or this big house and you're holding on to it, or then guess what? You won't be able to travel. There's a lot you will not be able to do. And if you are looking to lead a more adventurous life, what are you burdened by? What owns you? And what do you own? Are your resources requiring a maintenance and a lifestyle that is keeping you from really fulfilling your purpose? All those questions become essential, but they become essential in you considering and making choices around arguably mundane things. Am I spending money on things on a monthly basis that I don't need? Do I have too much in this apartment or this house and it's keeping me from thinking about moving to someplace smaller? Is there stuff? Purging becomes an interesting concept and idea. Should I put stuff on offer up? Or offer up is not a great idea right now with social distancing necessarily, but declutter. I mean, are there books that I don't want and don't need? Are there CDs that I have never, can I get some money for them? Does it make things lighter? Do I need that piece of furniture? Am I maintaining? Am I living in a space that is too big and so I spend a lot of time cleaning and maintaining it when I could use that time to do something? Are so many of my clothes that require dry cleaning, and now that I'm working from home I'm realizing how expensive it is to maintain them? Do I actually have stuff that is sustaining me and helping me? These are all mundane ways in which some of this decision making can be made, and frankly, if we're in a place where we can make that kind of decision making, we're lucky. So some sort of flow, whether it is financial or opportunities, as something, and even if a flow is not stopped for you, the question of re-evaluating what do you value will come up maybe in terms of choices. I'm going to let it unfold. You'll know and you'll see what is coming up. And quite frankly, I think for many people it has come up in the last week already, these considerations, whether they're financial. And sometimes I have to say they are relationship based. And that actually is more sobering. That is more sobering, and that could be something that has come up in the last week as well. Really, who or what am I carrying with me? And is it worth it or is it not? And this question of is it worth it or not is very Venus retrograde. Is there flow? Is it balancing? Is it sustaining? Is it joyous? Does it have harmony in it, or is it unharmonious? I'm looking at some notes because when I thought I'm going to talk about Venus retrograde again, I was like, what do I want to say? And I had this stuff here. So I said, the very first thing I wrote down was, God turns off the tap, the flow. There's no water. There can be a sense of hustle for some people that comes in over the next 6 weeks. The hustle can be created by this tap stopping, and the hustle can create ideas and options. Sometimes when people are not in tune with the cycle, they think that the hustle is stressful, and it is. But again, if you're hustling, I would ask you the question, why are you in what do you value? So what are you hustling for? What do you need to change? Do you need to change it immediately? For some people, they may need to in order to right size their lives. For some people, it's a longer term decision. In terms of relationships and finances, there can be a sense of not wanting to enable certain things anymore. I can't ignore this anymore. I can't enable this anymore. I no longer want this anymore. And with Venus retrograde, yes, there's a certain amount of sadness. But pay attention to that over the next 6 weeks. Venus is going to go direct in Gemini, you know, on June the 25th, and it's going to be there till August the 7th. So there is, so the breathing starts again. But the relationship side of things, the financial side of things carries its own stress. The relationship side of things is also not without its sadness. Not everyone is going to feel the tap turned off quite in these ways. But the idea of re-evaluating, changing plans, but not changing plans and rethinking them from a Mercury perspective, which is more like, what did I write down? What did we say? Did we think through everything? If you're changing plans, it's because what you have valued all along might go through a complete reversal. You were thinking of selling a property, but now you've realized, what if you put that room on rent? That kind of reevaluation. I was going along a certain way to generate income or cash or whatever it is. I was thinking about terminating my relationship with this doctor, publisher, agent, business partner, but now I'm thinking, should I be considering something like this? In certain cases where the relationship signals have been there and you've been carrying a weight for long, it could be that the next 6 weeks really do solidify and make things a little bit more decisive with regard to what you want to enable and what you don't. It's not like plans so far don't get reconsidered, but it's a very different flavor. It's a very different sense than reconsidering things the way it's a Mercury retrograde. With a Mercury retrograde, it's almost like you have to go back to that Excel spreadsheet. You have to go back to that project plan. You have to rethink and reprocess how something is supposed to happen and whether all the details have been thought through. With Venus retrograde, you were moving along with a certain set of values or what you were valuing, and what you value can sometimes go through a radically different, no, I'm not going to do that. I actually realize I value that more. Or as I've already outlined, the sense of value is around why you're doing what you're doing. Purging, paring down, cleaning house. Venus was retrograde in Gemini last in 2011, and prior to that, 2012. May to June 2012, and prior to that in 2004. That doesn't mean very much to me. It's actually interesting because I know where Venus is in retrograde in my chart, and I can sort of tell I don't see a direct correlation with that. The only reason why I mention that is retrogrades, you know, there's a tarot reader I follow on YouTube who I really like, but, you know, she pulled a card, this was a while ago, called Spiral, and she talked about spiraling out of a situation, and I really thought about that, and I think that rang true. I think that's what you do, and I thought about that more from astrology, because in astrologer you're looking at cycles all the time. When was Jupiter here last? When is the Sun here last? When is the new moon? And it is spirals. And I think that I finally had this epiphany where I thought, oh, retrogrades are spirals. We're revisiting, an eclipse might happen or something big might happen in a certain part of the chart, and then retrogrades can happen in that part of the chart, and we're just revisiting it in order to be able to process it and spiral out. There's only so much we can do as human beings at a given point in time to resolve something, or to understand something, or to make progress on it, or to get the blows and try to deal with the human condition. But you kind of almost have to revisit and revisit and revisit maybe the same issue and the same people, or maybe a new set of same kind, until you can actually graduate. But the graduation is not linear, and it doesn't happen in days. It can happen over years as we spiral out of a situation. So retrogrades, there can be something that comes through over the next 6 weeks that, even more than old people coming back, that is resonant of self-worth. So when it comes to, listen, when it comes to relationships and money, and the Sun is coming through in a big way right now, I'm going to take that as a sign. Everything is not a sign, I know. Well, maybe it is. There you have an astrologer talking. With Venus retrograde at the heart of it, this is why I'm doing this video. This is the question, is how much do you value yourself? So if we're spiraling out of a situation and it's financial, or we are trying to make our way through it, or we're trying to establish and identify what we value and what we don't value, it's all very nice, but there's nothing I can do about it. Or we're spiraling out of a relationship situation, the question we may have to ask as we're looking at this stuff is, what do I value? And we may be surprised as we answer that question that there are certain things that we have been dealing with and where we just go, that's it. And when it comes to relationships, someone told me about this, and I find this very interesting in certain types. You know, the whole sort of narcissist, codependency, all these spectrums are very 2020 and have become very prevalent in our consciousness. Gaslighting, these words. But someone used the word fog, fear, obligation, guilt. And we may find that if we're in situations, whether they are financial, because this kind of fear, obligation, guilt spectrum affects and sits on and preys on a low sense of self-esteem and self-worth. And while Venus is retrograde, we may find ourselves in a place where we are no longer in a place where we may actually want to stop the flow of that tap, this kind of fear, obligation, guilt thing that can be so present. And with the square, as I've mentioned to you, the square between Gemini and Pisces and Neptune and Pisces, there can be a certain amount of deception and loss, and often it comes through, even though there's a higher purpose to it with Neptune, it can often come through with a certain amount of deception and game playing. And often this kind of foggy, watery behavior can be part of it. Pay attention to it. The eclipses are in Gemini, and I mentioned this yesterday, and between now and for much of 2021, there's a great deal of emphasis to pay attention to what I will call somewhat disparagingly as the fray. Typically, I would say to people, stay out of the fray. But sometimes, with the sign of Gemini, it's time to get in the pool. It's time to get involved with the fray. The opportunities will come through socialization and the people you interact with and who is around you and your neighborhood and to some extent your siblings. It is time to be interacting. You know, it's not a time to be aloof. It's not a time to be aloof. Not for the next year and a half. Not for the next year and a half, 2 years. I'm not looking at each individual chart, so I can't talk about your own strategy. For some people, their strategy is to be aloof. For some people, their strategy is to not be aloof. So I don't know where your north node is or what your sun sign or your moon sign and all that kind of stuff is. And if you do have a Gemini ascendant, know that your ascendant is your best self. So look to the Gemini placements and where they're occurring and what planets are in Gemini. With the sun, it's more internal. With the moon, it's, of course, more emotional. These are very reductive statements, but look to those if you know those. But I'm going to just end other planetary placements too. Mercury in Gemini, God, strong Mercury. Irrespective. This is something else that I want to mention with this, with regard to this idea of networking and the fray. You can be the most aloof person in the world, but your opportunities, if you are not on social media, and you could be really irritated by this person or that person on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, but this is where opportunities are being posted. Develop your own sense of boundaries around what it is that social media and communication and email means to you at this time. With Venus retrograde in Gemini, that may happen, but I don't think that it's a time to say, I'm done with this, I'm done with these, I'm done with it, so I'm just going to turn it all off. Because if you're aloof to the point and spiritual to the point where you're just watching your charts and tarot charts and sitting in your room all day, opportunities that are there will not be able to reach you. There's no way for God to reach you if you're sitting in your room all day. And this is not a sitting in our rooms all day time. It is a time to get involved with the fray, and it is a time to reevaluate and establish what your values are when it comes to things like, this is the most distracting sunshine ever. It is time to reevaluate. It is time to what your philosophy is when it comes to things like social media and communication. And you can choose to disengage or put up with. We all have to put up with each other, you know. People do have to put up with you. And you have to put up with them. So this is your time to figure out who or what you are willing to put up with, who you and what you are not willing to put up with, especially if it's foggy behavior. And But it's not a time to detach to the point where you are running away from situations and tapping into God and Source. By all means, stay tapped into that. But the opportunities will likely, this is a general reading, I don't know where Gemini sits for all of you, but from a general perspective, it is time to interact, and it's time to be relatively plugged in and to think about themes of popularity and picking up information and sharing information. Be discerning about what sort of fray you are. If my advice of being in the fray means that you're exposing yourself to situations and people that are dangerous and harmful to you, people who are gossiping, people who are backbiting, people who are going to knife you in the back, that is not what I'm saying. But not everyone in our immediate social circle is our best friend. So there is a component of network and give and take. But if we feel like we are sharing information that we are comfortable with people with whom there's a mutual understanding, then that's a different thing altogether. And some of these things are just naturally felt. But developing our own boundaries around social media, especially, and who we are friends with and who we're not and who we're communicating with, is important, because that's where we might find the opportunities. So understanding what we want to turn off but keep on becomes important. Who is in your circle? Who is in your well? Who is in your well? Gemini is the sign of the well we live in. If you're a frog and you live in a well, everything that happens in that well, the interactions, who's in it with you, your neighbors, your siblings, the other tadpoles, interaction, feedback, performance reviews, interviews, sales, your neighborhood, your Starbucks, Gemini. How you pick up on information, how you get things done, who you're selling things to, all that kind of stuff. Develop an appropriate relationship with it. One final thing with Venus. The idea of love and harmony. And this is going to go counter to everything that I have said, but somewhere we have to think about this. So long as we're in a place where I'm not going to talk more about, when we come to self-worth, there are stages of establishing self-worth. And one part of staging that self-worth tends to be that we start to judge everybody around us and evaluate everybody around us. That is the purpose of Venus in retrograde, okay? It's not entirely fair. And if you stay in that place too long, then you are not really in a place of empowerment, because it's just the other side of the same coin. You're no longer disempowered, but you're still giving your power away because you're looking for people or situations that yank your chain. At some point, in order to get, and I see this a lot with people who have nodal placements, or are struggling with themes of codependency or independence or self-worth, being feisty and rebellious and setting down boundaries you're on your way to empowerment, but you're not empowered yet, because you're still drinking from the same pool. At a certain point in time, you have got to move towards love, compassion, and understanding towards yourself and others. And through that place and through that lens, know where your boundaries are and where you're going to establish them. If you're at a place, and it's difficult to do and we can't do it constantly, but if you get to a place where your circle and what you value and your finances are at a place where your chain isn't being yanked, and I find that it can only happen if there is a tapping into the Venusian energy of love and harmony and balance and trust and a sense of worth, a sense of the chain gets yanked through foggy things, fear, obligation, guilt, other things. Fear with money. So part of the trick here is going to become a certain amount of work around removing the collar and putting it to one side, so that whatever it is that yanks your chain can keep doing that, but you're free of it. Once you get to that point, establishing boundaries becomes easier. And you're no longer triggered. You're no longer on the codependency independence bus. You're just in a place where things emerge from a sense of love for yourself and love for others. Not easy. It does have to be protected, and that's where Mars comes in. That's why Mars and Venus go together, pursuit, boundaries, etc. But some